My name is Adrian, and the day Paige dumped me for being poor, she expected me to break. We were sitting in a crowded diner while rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers. I had just paid for coffee with the last few bills in my wallet. Paige stared at the cracked screen of my phone, then at the worn sleeves of my jacket, and finally at me with the tired expression people use when they have already decided you are beneath them. She said she wanted stability. What she meant was money. Then Grant pulled up outside in a black truck that looked expensive enough to have its own weather system. He leaned on the horn, and half the diner turned to look. Paige smiled in a way she had not smiled at me in months. She stood, left one untouched packet of crackers beside her cup, and told me I had potential but no future. I watched her leave without raising my voice. That was the first mistake she made. People think anger is power. It is not. Anger is smoke. It makes you cough, blinds your eyes, and tells everyone where the fire is. Real power is sitting still while the person insulting you mistakes your silence for weakness. I slipped the cracker packet into my pocket, finished my coffee, and walked through the rain to the only property I owned. 3 days earlier, my grandfather had died and left me a warehouse at the edge of the city. Calling it a warehouse was generous. It was a gray steel box surrounded by weeds, cracked pavement, and a chain-link fence that leaned like it was exhausted. The roof leaked in 2 places. The lights flickered. One wall smelled like wet cardboard. Still, it was mine. Inside, I found a workbench, 6 rusted shelves, an old handcart, a locked cabinet, and a handwritten note from my grandfather. The note had only 1 sentence. Leave something useful inside before midnight. I almost laughed. My grandfather had always enjoyed puzzles. Even at his funeral, I had wondered whether the closed casket was part of some final trick. I placed the packet of crackers on the workbench, set my phone alarm for 11:59, and waited. At midnight, every light in the warehouse went out. There was a sound like a camera shutter, sharp and clean. When the lights returned, 2 cracker packets sat on the workbench. I did not move for 12 seconds. Then I checked the doors, the windows, the ceiling, and the empty space beneath the table. No hidden person, no trapdoor, no fishing line. The 2 packets were identical down to the tiny bend in one corner, and the printed expiration date. I opened both. Same smell, same crumbs, same bland taste. Most people would have celebrated. I began testing. I placed 1 bottle of water on the floor, 1 steel wrench on the bench, 1 apple on a shelf, and a dead flashlight in the cabinet. I also left a live insect beneath a glass jar, because rules matter more than excitement. At midnight, the water became 2 bottles. The wrench became 2 wrenches. The flashlight became 2 dead flashlights. The apple stayed 1 apple. The insect stayed 1 insect. Non-living objects only. The next night, I left both water bottles inside. At midnight, there were 4. The night after that, 8. Exponential growth is a polite phrase for something terrifying. 1 bottle becomes more than 1,000 in 10 nights. In 20 nights, it becomes more than 1,000,000. People hear numbers like that and imagine abundance. I imagined leverage. By sunrise, I had written the rules across the wall. Anything non-living and fully inside the warehouse at midnight produced 1 exact copy. Copies could copy. Contents inside sealed containers duplicated with the container. Electricity stored in batteries was copied. Fuel inside cans was copied. Damage was copied too. A cracked tool produced another cracked tool. Position mattered. Every duplicate appeared beside the original, even when there should not have been enough room. That final rule was the strangest. On the 4th night, I filled an entire shelf with water. At midnight, the shelf duplicated along with every bottle on it. The new shelf appeared behind the old one, and the back wall moved farther away without changing the outside shape of the building. I walked outside. The warehouse was still small. I walked back in. The aisle was twice as long. The interior had stopped obeying the exterior. That was when I understood my grandfather had not left me a building. He had left me a kingdom with 1 citizen. Me. The next morning, every phone in the city screamed with an emergency alert. A comet fragment had broken apart near the moon. Scientists expected a chain of electromagnetic storms, satellite failures, and toxic dust in the upper atmosphere. The news anchors said the damage might be limited. Officials advised people to keep 3 days of water and remain calm. Remain calm is what powerful people say when they are afraid the crowd will notice they have no plan. The first pulse was predicted in 7 days, 7 midnights. A normal person could not prepare for the end of the world in a week. I did not need a week. I needed multiplication. I sold the few things I did not care about, emptied my bank account, and bought 1 of everything that mattered. Bottled water, canned food, rice sealed in buckets, batteries, medicine, fuel cans, portable solar panels, water filters, flashlights, radios, blankets, tools, lumber, cement bags, steel pipes, wire, seeds, protective masks, fire extinguishers, soap, toothpaste. The cashier at the hardware store looked at my cart and asked whether I was building a bunker. I told him I was building inventory. He laughed. I remembered his face. At the warehouse, I arranged every item into precise rows. Space no longer concerned me. Each midnight created new shelves and longer aisles. Water doubled, food doubled, batteries doubled, medicine doubled. But I did not stop at survival supplies. Survival keeps you alive. Spectacle makes people obey. I bought one high-powered projector, one industrial speaker, one camera drone, one electric motorcycle, one polished black coat, and one ridiculous silver chair from a furniture store closing sale. The chair looked like a throne designed by someone who had only heard rumors about royalty. Daniel arrived on the third afternoon. He had known me since school and had spent years repairing engines in a garage where everything smelled like oil and bad decisions. He was the only person who ever mocked me without believing I was weak. He stared down an aisle filled with 200 generators, then turned around and checked the tiny warehouse door behind him. For once, Daniel had nothing funny to say. I explained the rule, not the full rule. Never give anyone the full shape of your weapon. I told him objects duplicated at midnight, and the interior expanded. I did not tell him how many tests I had performed, how exact the copies were, or that I had already hidden reserve stock behind 3 false aisles. Daniel asked whether I trusted him. I told him trust was not a feeling, it was a prediction. He accepted that because he knew me. Together, we worked without sleep. Daniel converted duplicated steel frames and motors into compact cargo vehicles. I tested whether assembled machines duplicated with fuel, loaded batteries, and programmed instructions. They did. 1 drone became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. By the 6th night, the ceiling above the newest aisle had risen high enough for thousands of drones to hover in stacked formation. Their charging lights glowed like red stars in a metal sky. Daniel looked up and whispered that it was beautiful. I thought it looked useful. Paige called me that evening. Grant had taken her shopping for emergency supplies, but the stores were empty. She asked whether I had found anything. Her voice was softer than it had been in the diner, not apologetic. Careful, I told her I had a packet of crackers. Then I ended the call. The first electromagnetic pulse struck before dawn. The city went dark in a single breath. Streetlights died. Phones became mirrors, cars stopped in intersections, airplanes vanished from the sky. Then the emergency generators began coughing to life, one building at a time, like frightened animals in the dark. The second pulse came 20 minutes later and killed most of those too. By noon, the sky had turned gray. By evening, ash-like dust began falling. It was not radioactive, but it poisoned open water and shredded unprotected lungs. People rushed indoors. Grocery stores were stripped. Hospitals lost power. Gas stations became battlefields. My warehouse glowed. I had wrapped the outside in duplicated floodlights powered by duplicated batteries. Above the roof, a projector cast a white symbol into the clouds. A simple crown inside a circle. Daniel asked why I chose a crown. Because a logo reaches the brain before an explanation. The front gate opened at sunset. People gathered beyond the fence, drawn by the light. They expected a charity line. I gave them theater. Every drone rose at once. Thousands of machines poured from the warehouse in perfect silence, carrying water, masks, and sealed food boxes. They formed the crown symbol above the crowd, then descended in measured rows. Speakers played a low note that made the pavement vibrate. I stepped onto the roof wearing the black coat. No shouting, no desperate promises. I simply told them the warehouse had supplies, power, clean water, and shelter. Anyone who followed instructions would eat. Anyone who stole would leave with nothing. A man in the crowd demanded to know who had put me in charge. I pointed at the dark city behind him and the illuminated fortress beneath my feet. No one asked again. That first night I fed 800 people. I also watched them. The cameras identified who shared food, who hid extra portions, who helped children, who tested the fence, and who stared too long at the doors. Power is not just having what people need. It is knowing what they do when they think nobody is looking. By the second day, I had a labor force without forcing anyone. I offered batteries for moving barriers, medicine for cleaning rooms, hot meals for building air filters. People organized themselves because I made every useful action immediately valuable. Daniel called it a community. I called it an equation. Then Grant arrived. He came in the same black truck that had taken Paige from the diner. Now the truck had steel plates welded across the doors and 6 armed vehicles behind it. Grant had seized a supermarket distribution center on the north side. He controlled hundreds of frightened people through food rationing and public beatings. Paige sat beside him wearing a clean mask while everyone around her looked half-starved. Grant stepped out and announced that all major supplies in the area would be placed under his control. I almost admired the confidence, almost. He had 30 armed fighters, 6 vehicles, and a loud voice. I had 4,000 drones, 600 generators, enough concrete to build a mountain, and 3 midnights of preparation he knew nothing about. I invited him inside. Daniel nearly dropped a wrench when he heard me. Grant entered with Paige and 4 guards. I led them through the first aisle, which I had deliberately arranged to look impressive but limited. Water on one side, canned food on the other, medicine behind locked mesh. Grant smiled. He thought he was measuring my treasure. He was measuring the lobby. Paige avoided my eyes until we reached the silver chair. I sat while Grant remained standing. That tiny choice irritated him more than an insult would have. He offered protection in exchange for half my supplies. I told him no. He threatened to return at midnight with every fighter he had. I told him to return at 11:59. That confused him, which was the point. Before leaving, Paige noticed the original cracker packet displayed inside a glass case beside my chair. I had labeled it First Investment. She understood. Her face tightened. At 11:59, Grant returned with nearly 100 fighters. They spread across the road, carrying rifles, bats, shields, and homemade armor. The people behind my fence panicked. Daniel asked whether he should start the drones. I told him the drones were for the second act. At midnight, the warehouse flashed. The doors opened. Grant's army charged. The pavement in front of them suddenly erupted with sound. During the day, Daniel and I had buried hundreds of compact speakers beneath thin panels. Every speaker played the recorded roar of an approaching train at full volume. Half the attackers froze. Then duplicated construction lights ignited from both sides, turning night into a white wall. That was when the first act began. Thousands of bright red rubber balls rolled down hidden ramps and flooded the road. Grant's fighters slipped, crashed into one another, and dropped weapons. It looked less like a battle and more like an angry playground attacking adults. The crowd behind my fence started laughing. Fear broke. Then I launched the drones. They did not fire bullets. Bullets would have been wasteful. The drones released clouds of harmless blue powder, tagging every attacker so my cameras could track them. Others dropped nets. A final wave carried speakers that repeated Grant's earlier threats in his own voice, captured during his visit. His authority collapsed in real time. Grant tried to retreat to his truck. The truck was gone. While he watched the sky, a duplicated electric tow vehicle had silently dragged it through a side gate. I stood on the roof as his fighters scattered. Grant looked up at me with blue powder covering his face and rage shaking his shoulders. I told him he could leave on foot. He promised he would destroy me. I believed he would try. That was useful. Predictable enemies are safer than grateful friends. By sunrise, half of Grant's people had joined my settlement. They did not join because I was kind. They joined because I made Grant look small. In 3 days, the warehouse became the center of the city. I duplicated prefabricated walls and built sealed housing blocks around it. I duplicated solar panels until every roof within sight shone black beneath the gray sky. I duplicated water filters and connected them to rooftop collection tanks. I duplicated electric bikes, heaters, stoves, radios, mattresses, medical kits, and enough toilet paper to make Daniel laugh for 5 straight minutes. Then I did something ridiculous on purpose. I created a delivery parade. Every afternoon, 1,000 identical black cargo bikes rolled through the streets in perfect lines, each carrying food and water to safe zones. Drones flew overhead projecting the crown symbol onto buildings. Speakers played dramatic orchestral music because people move faster when they feel like they are inside a trailer. Children cheered. Adults began calling the warehouse the Crown. I did not choose the name. I simply made sure everyone repeated it. That was when Iris arrived. She came alone, carrying no weapon, wearing a white dust coat and a respirator with one cracked lens. She had been running emergency broadcasts from a university tower until the power failed. People knew her voice, calm, precise, impossible to rattle. She had guided thousands to shelter during the first pulse. Iris walked through my gate, looked at the drones, the walls, the endless power cables, and asked one question. Why did every bottle have the same tiny scratch near the cap? Daniel glanced at me. I smiled. Finally, someone interesting. Iris did not believe my supplies came from stockpiles. She had counted delivery vehicles before the disaster. She knew which stores had emptied. She knew how much fuel existed in the city and how quickly hospitals were burning through it. Most people saw abundance and stopped asking questions. Iris saw repetition. I took her to a meeting room with 1 table, 2 chairs, and 12 cameras hidden in plain sight. I offered her tea. She rotated the cup before drinking and found the identical glaze mark on 3 cups stacked nearby. She said I had a manufacturing process. I said that was one possibility. She said the process operated faster than any factory, used no visible raw materials, and produced perfect defects. Then she placed 2 batteries on the table. Both had the same dent. Midnight, she guessed. I did not react. She smiled because I had not reacted. That was the beginning of our game. Iris wanted access to the warehouse. I wanted her mind. A city can be ruled with food, but a world requires information. She knew radio networks, crowd movement, weather patterns, and how panic spread. More importantly, she could predict what intelligent enemies would do because she was one of them. I gave her a room near the communications tower and told her she could broadcast warnings under my protection. She asked what I wanted in return. I told her the truth. I wanted her to try to defeat me. Daniel thought I was joking. I was not. A ruler surrounded by people who agree with him becomes stupid. I wanted one person close enough to notice my errors and proud enough to attack them. Iris accepted. The next morning, her first broadcast announced that the crown had enough supplies for several weeks, not forever, and that nobody should become dependent on one location. It sounded like responsible advice. It was also a challenge. People began asking whether I could run out. At noon, I answered without speaking. Every warehouse door opened. A river of bottled water moved out on conveyor belts, climbed steel ramps, and filled a clear tower higher than a 10-story building. When the tower was full, pumps blasted clean water into the air, creating an artificial waterfall that glittered beneath the floodlights. The crowd went silent. Then I turned the pumps off before wasting more than a few minutes. My message was simple. I could afford spectacle. Iris watched from the tower with binoculars. She had expected a speech. I gave her physics. That night, she placed a marked radio inside the warehouse without telling me. A tiny transmitter was hidden beneath its battery cover. She wanted to see whether the copy transmitted on the same frequency. I found it 11 minutes before midnight. I left it exactly where it was. At midnight, it became 2 radios. Then I swapped one with a radio from my hidden reserve and sent the other to a moving drone. Iris tracked 2 signals traveling in opposite directions. One circled the warehouse. The other raced toward the abandoned subway. She followed the subway signal and found a room filled with hundreds of copied radios, each broadcasting a different tone. When she returned at dawn, she looked annoyed. I told her the experiment had been informative. She asked what I had learned. I said she preferred elegant traps and hated wasting equipment. She asked what she had learned. I leaned closer and said that I let you try. I avoided long conversations because words reveal too much. A short sentence can occupy someone's mind for days. While Iris investigated me, the disaster grew worse. The dust blocked sunlight. Temperatures dropped. Fires spread through neighborhoods where broken gas lines ignited. The river turned dark with chemical runoff. Hospitals called for medicine, but the roads were clogged with wrecked cars and desperate crowds. I could have sent ordinary trucks. Instead, I built a train. There were no working rails between the warehouse and the central hospital, so Daniel designed modular electric carriers with rubber wheels and magnetic couplers. We completed one prototype before midnight. I placed it inside with a loaded medical container. At midnight, there were 2. The next night, 4. By the following afternoon, a silver convoy of 64 identical carriers slid through the streets. Drones lifted abandoned cars out of the way. Portable bridges unfolded over collapsed sections of road. Floodlights swept the buildings as the convoy moved. People leaned from windows to watch. The carriers did not just deliver medicine, they delivered an idea. Wherever I chose to go, a road would appear. At the hospital, the remaining staff expected boxes. I brought an entire emergency wing. Before midnight, Daniel and I had assembled one sealed medical module with beds, oxygen concentrators, lights, filters, and surgical equipment. The copies arrived stacked on carriers. Cranes unfolded them like giant metal books. Within an hour, 16 clean rooms stood in the parking lot. Iris broadcast the operation across every working radio frequency. She called it impossible. I made sure the word repeated. Grant heard it too. He had retreated north and rebuilt his gang around a fuel depot. He no longer tried to attack me directly. Instead, he attacked anyone carrying my supplies. He burned 2 delivery stations, stole water, and left the crown symbol painted upside down on walls. He wanted me angry. I gave him patience. For 4 days, I allowed him to believe his ambushes were working. I sent small convoys along routes he could predict. Each carried real supplies, but every box also contained a tracking bead. Grant stole enough food to feed his camp, and enough trackers to map every vehicle, storage room, and tunnel he controlled. Iris noticed that I was losing supplies too easily. She asked whether I planned to strike. I said I already had. At midnight on the 5th day, every tracker activated. Not with a signal. Grant woke to hear the same dramatic orchestra used by my delivery parade, blasting from every stolen box, every captured bike, and every hidden storage room. His fighters ran through the depot trying to smash speakers while my drones recorded the chaos from above. Then the warehouse doors opened, and Grant saw my real move. I had duplicated his black truck. During his failed attack, Daniel had dragged it inside. We repaired it, painted the crown symbol on the hood, and let it multiply. By dawn, 200 identical black trucks rolled toward the north side from 4 directions. Grant could not tell which one carried me. None of them did. I was standing on top of the warehouse, drinking coffee. The trucks were remotely controlled, half carried smoke machines. A quarter carried empty crates. Some projected false engine heat to confuse scopes. 80 released small drones through hidden roof panels. 10 were filled with mattresses to absorb gunfire. One carried a giant inflatable version of my silver chair. That one was Daniel's idea. It rose above the convoy like a floating throne and drifted over Grant's depot while speakers announced that resistance had become embarrassing. Even I laughed. Grant ordered his fighters to shoot the trucks. The first line stopped. The second line drove around it. The third line unfolded steel ramps and climbed over the disabled vehicles. Drones cut power cables and dropped magnetic clamps onto weapons. Foam cannons coated the entrances in expanding white material. Within 6 minutes, the depot was sealed. Within 10, Grant's fighters surrendered. Grant escaped through a drainage tunnel because I had left it open. Daniel accused me of making a mistake. I showed him the tracker map. Grant was carrying 3. A defeated enemy becomes unpredictable when trapped. A defeated enemy with one visible escape route becomes a messenger. Grant ran to every group that still feared me and told them about the trucks, drones, foam, and floating chair. By sunset, 2 more armed camps abandoned their weapons without seeing a single soldier. Grant had become my advertisement. Iris understood immediately. That bothered her. She confronted me in the communications tower while cold wind shook the windows. She said I had let people get hurt during the earlier ambushes just to map Grant's network. I told her nobody had died. She said that was not the point. I told her results were always the point. For the first time, Iris looked at me with real disgust. Good. Disgust is stronger than suspicion. Suspicion watches from a distance. Disgust steps closer because it wants proof. The city now had power in 6 districts, clean water in 4, and food deliveries to every large shelter. Yet I knew supplies alone would not hold it. People needed warmth, and the sky was getting colder by the hour. So I decided to change the weather. Not the real weather. That would have required magic. I changed the weather people experienced. Daniel built one compact heating tower from steel ducts, electric coils, air filters, and industrial fans. The tower pulled poisoned air through layers of duplicated filters, heated it, and pushed it into a sealed street canopy. After 2 midnights, I had 4 towers. After 4, 16. We covered an entire downtown block with transparent roofing panels and inflated supports. Warm filtered air flowed beneath it. Trees that had been moved inside stood under artificial lights. Duplicated soil filled enormous planters. Children took off their masks for the first time since the dust began. I called it Summer Street. Then I built Winter Street beside it, just because I could. Winter Street used refrigeration units, artificial snow machines, and blue lights. While the outside world froze under gray ash, families walked between a tropical market and a glowing snow festival, separated by one set of doors. It made no practical sense. That was why it worked. People stopped thinking only about surviving the next hour. They began imagining a future. Hope is easier to control when you give it a location. Paige arrived at Summer Street wearing a torn coat. Grant had abandoned her during his escape. For days, she had traded jewelry for food. Now the jewelry was gone. She waited at the gate while 2 guards checked her mask. I watched through a camera. Daniel asked whether I wanted her removed. I said no. Removing her would have been emotional. I had something better. Paige was brought to the silver chair, which now sat on a raised platform overlooking the main warehouse aisle. The original cracker packet remained inside its glass case. She asked for food. I gave her 1 packet of crackers. Not the original, one of the copies. She stared at it as if I had slapped her. Then fighting broke out near the ration station behind her. 2 exhausted people were pulling at another cracker packet because the next delivery had been delayed by a blocked road. Paige turned toward the noise. I pressed a control. The main warehouse doors opened. Lights ignited 1 row at a time. The first aisle held bottled water from floor to ceiling. The second held canned food. The third held medicine. Beyond them were batteries, blankets, fuel, steel, lumber, vehicles, solar panels, generators, seeds, filters, clothing, machines, and objects so distant they became lines of color. The interior stretched farther than Paige could see. Conveyor belts moved through the endless space like rivers. Drones floated beneath a ceiling lost in darkness. New aisles continued appearing beyond the last visible point. Paige's cracker packet slipped from her fingers. She whispered my name. I looked down from the silver chair and remembered the diner, the rain, and the untouched packet beside her cup. She had told me I had no future. Now she could not see the end of mine. I gave her a warm room and work at the distribution center. Not because I forgave her. Forgiveness had nothing to do with it. I wanted her alive long enough to understand the scale of her mistake. That should have been my victory. Instead, Iris ruined the moment. Every radio in the city suddenly carried her voice. She announced that the crown's supplies were generated by a single location at a specific time, and that concentrating everyone's survival around one source was dangerous. She did not reveal the warehouse's exact secret. She did something more effective. She made people wonder what would happen if I disappeared. Crowds gathered. Rumors spread. Some said I was using stolen military technology. Others said the warehouse was alien. One group claimed I had trapped workers underground. People who had cheered the artificial waterfall now watched the doors with fear. Iris had attacked my greatest weakness, not the warehouse, me. I could duplicate objects, but I could not duplicate loyalty. At least, not directly. I summoned Iris to the roof. She arrived expecting guards. I was alone. She said the city deserved a system that did not depend on my judgment. I told her systems depend on judgment too. They simply hide the person making it. She accused me of turning rescue into worship. I asked whether the water became less clean because my symbol was on the bottle. She had no quick answer, but she did not need one. Iris was not trying to win the conversation. She was forcing me to reveal my goal. So I revealed a piece. I told her I intended to make the city impossible to conquer, impossible to starve, and impossible to frighten. I told her people would follow because every alternative had failed. She asked what happened when I failed. I looked over the glowing streets below. I said, then someone clever enough will replace me. Iris studied my face for a long time. She realized I was not afraid of being replaced. I was afraid of being replaced by someone inferior. The next morning, I solved the loyalty problem with a contest. I announced that every shelter would receive an identical sealed black box. At midnight, the boxes would open. Each contained tools, seeds, filters, and instructions for building a small independent survival station. People thought Iris had forced me to share power. That was intentional. The boxes did not duplicate. Only the warehouse could do that. But each station gave neighborhoods enough supplies for several weeks, and enough equipment to clean water, grow food, and restore basic electricity. I appeared less controlling. My influence grew. Every station used parts that only I could replace in large numbers. Every radio connected to my network. Every battery carried the crown. Independence was the product. Dependence was the infrastructure. Iris saw it and said nothing. That silence told me she was planning something larger. The opportunity arrived with the third sky pulse. It struck at midday, stronger than the first two. Even shielded equipment flickered. A distant dam lost control. Warning sirens failed, but the river began rising fast, pushing black water toward the southern districts. Thousands of people were trapped between the flood and collapsed highways. I had less than 6 hours. The warehouse could create infinite objects, but only at midnight. That was the limit Iris had been searching for. She knew I could not instantly duplicate more rescue equipment. She believed the flood would expose the difference between preparation and omnipotence. She was right about the limit. She was wrong about my preparation. For days, I had been duplicating shipping containers, inflatable barriers, electric boats, bridge sections, pumps, cables, anchors, and enormous bags of lightweight foam. Daniel thought I was preparing for fire. Iris thought I was building housing. I had prepared for every obvious disaster because choosing one would have been lazy. At 1 in the afternoon, drones projected evacuation arrows onto the streets. At 2, cargo bikes delivered masks and flotation vests. At 3, duplicated cranes lifted bridge sections over rooftops and connected buildings into elevated escape routes. At 4, the river crossed the first barrier. I led it. The water rushed into an empty industrial zone, where thousands of containers had been arranged into a giant spiral. The spiral slowed the current and guided it toward a dry canal. Pumps the size of houses roared to life. Foam barriers expanded across side streets, hardening into white walls. From above, the entire southern district looked like a machine. I stood in the command tower while Daniel shouted pressure readings, and Iris watched maps update. The river rose faster than predicted. One bridge failed. A crowd of nearly 600 people became trapped on a parking structure surrounded by black water. Our boats could not reach them through the debris. Iris said we had to abandon the lower shelters and concentrate everything on the parking structure. It was the logical choice. That was why I rejected it. Abandoning thousands to save hundreds would preserve more lives than losing everyone. But it would destroy the idea I had built. A king who selects which district drowns becomes a manager of death. I needed a move that saved both. I looked at the warehouse inventory map. Then I saw the most useless aisle in the building: toys. Weeks earlier, Daniel had brought in a box of inflatable pool animals to entertain children. The box had been copied every night because nobody bothered removing it. There were now more than 200,000 inflatable ducks, whales, flamingos, and smiling sharks sealed in compressed packs. I ordered every available drone to carry them south. Iris thought I had finally lost my mind. The drones released the packs into the flood channel. Remote valves opened. The toys inflated at once, filling the streets with a bright plastic tide. Yellow ducks slammed against broken cars. Pink flamingos tangled around poles. Blue whales wedged beneath collapsed beams. The absurd mass trapped floating debris and created a soft barrier around the parking structure. Then the boats crossed over it. 600 people escaped by walking across a shifting island of inflatable animals, while cameras broadcast the rescue across the city. Children laughed from rooftops. Adults cried. Daniel nearly fell out of his chair. Iris stared at the screen and whispered that no rational model would have predicted that. Exactly. Intelligence is not finding the best move on the board. It is realizing the board can become a duck. By sunset, the flood had been redirected. No district was abandoned. The parking structure stood inside a mountain of inflatable toys visible from miles away. My approval became absolute. Iris's challenge had made me stronger again. But the flood also exposed something I had hidden. During the rescue, several warehouse doors remained open. Cameras captured the impossible depth inside. By nightfall, every armed group beyond the city knew rumors of endless supplies were true. And one of those groups was not led by Grant. It was led by someone who had artillery. The first shell landed outside Summer Street just before dawn. The explosion shattered the transparent roof and threw warm air into the frozen street. A second shell struck a power tower. A third hit the outer wall. No warning, no demand. Whoever was attacking did not want a share. They wanted the source. I watched the smoke rise and felt something I had not felt since the first cracker duplicated. Surprise. Then a radio message arrived. Grant's voice. He had found a military convoy stranded west of the city and convinced its commander that I was hoarding enough fuel and medicine to control the entire region. He promised them access if they helped him take the warehouse. Grant was not the real threat. He was the door the threat had used. Iris wanted immediate evacuation. Daniel wanted to attack the artillery position with drones. Paige wanted to hide. I wanted all three reactions. Fear reveals roles. I ordered civilians into the underground shelter modules. I sent half the drones west in plain view. Then I opened the warehouse gates and turned off the floodlights. For the first time since the disaster began, the crown went dark. The city panicked. That was part of the plan. The enemy convoy advanced, believing the shelling had damaged my power. Armored vehicles rolled down the western highway. Soldiers followed behind portable shields. Grant rode near the front in a stolen command truck, broadcasting that Adrian's miracle had ended. I let the message play. Inside the warehouse, every light was on. Daniel and I stood beside the largest machine we had ever built, a modular crane platform with 6 magnetic arms, 40 electric motors, and wheels taller than a person. We called it the Spider because Daniel refused to call it the extremely reasonable defensive device. One spider had been difficult to build. Fortunately, I did not need one. The warehouse flashed at midnight. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. By the time the convoy reached the city, 32 spiders were waiting beneath camouflage sheets along the highway. Their batteries were fully charged because stored energy duplicated too. The first armored vehicle crossed the marked line. The road rose. Duplicated hydraulic plates flipped from beneath the pavement and tilted the vehicle sideways. Before it could recover, 2 spiders unfolded. Magnetic arms locked onto the armor with thunderous clangs, lifted the entire vehicle, and placed it on top of a concrete wall. Not smashed, displayed. The next vehicles tried to spread out. The highway shoulders collapsed into trenches filled with construction foam and thousands of steel ball bearings. Tires spun uselessly. Drones descended trailing cables, wrapping barrels, axles, and antennas. The convoy fired at the sky. The drones they saw were cheap decoys made from plastic frames and tiny lights. The real drones moved beneath the bridge line. Then my speakers activated. Grant's voice from his earlier threats played across the battlefield, followed by his promises to the convoy commander. I had combined recordings to make it sound as though Grant planned to betray both sides. That part was unfair. I enjoyed it. Confusion spread through the convoy. Orders contradicted one another. Vehicles stopped moving. The spiders stepped from concealment one by one, towering above the highway like metal monsters. I appeared on every screen the convoy still had. I was seated in the silver chair. I told them the city had medicine, fuel, and food. Anyone who lowered a weapon would receive all 3. Anyone who continued forward would become part of the wall. Behind me, a camera showed the first armored vehicle balanced 20 feet above the road like a museum exhibit. Most surrendered. Grant did not. He seized the command truck and drove through a maintenance lane Daniel had missed. He accelerated toward the warehouse gates, convinced that reaching the interior would give him control. I had expected that too. The maintenance lane was not a mistake. It was a runway. Grant's truck hit a ramp at full speed and flew through the open gate. For one glorious second, he probably believed he had broken into my kingdom. Then the truck landed in an aisle filled entirely with mattresses, thousands of them. The vehicle bounced, rolled, and sank between layers of duplicated foam. Airbags exploded. Boxes of pillows burst overhead. By the time Grant crawled from the window, feathers covered him from head to toe. Daniel looked at the camera and asked whether I had planned the feathers. I had not. Sometimes the universe understands presentation. Grant stumbled into the main aisle and saw me waiting beside the glass case. No guards, no weapon in my hands. He shouted that the warehouse should belong to someone strong enough to take it. I told him strength had already been tested. He charged. A floor panel opened, and Grant dropped waist deep into a pit of rubber balls left from his first attack. He struggled, cursed, and sank farther. I walked past him without looking down. Paige watched from the upper walkway. She had once chosen Grant because his truck looked expensive. Now the truck was buried under mattresses, and Grant was being defeated by playground equipment for the second time. There are lessons too perfect to explain. The convoy joined us before sunrise. Their commander remained unnamed because names are rewards, and that person had not earned one. The artillery was moved outside the city and pointed away. The injured received medicine. The hungry received food. I did not execute Grant. Dead enemies become symbols. Living failures become warnings. I placed him in a clear holding room beside the entrance, with a perfect view of the endless aisles he had failed to claim. He was given clean clothes, regular meals, and no audience. For Grant, being ignored was a harsher sentence than pain. The city celebrated. I did not. The attack had revealed 3 weaknesses. The warehouse was fixed in one location. My power activated only at midnight. And the more people depended on me, the more enemies could target them to control my decisions. I needed mobility, speed, and distance. So I decided to duplicate a city, not every building. That would have been unimaginative. I designed a moving fortress made from linked modules. Housing blocks, farms, clinics, workshops, batteries, water tanks, command rooms, drone bays, and defensive walls could lock together around enormous electric carriers. Each module fit inside the warehouse. Each could duplicate. Each copy could leave under its own power. Daniel stared at the design and said the total length would be several miles. I told him that was the compact version. For the next 8 nights, the deepest aisles filled with machines. Wheels, tracks, solar roofs, folding bridges, kitchens, classrooms, gardens under lights, towers that could lower flat during movement and rise at rest. Iris helped. She claimed she was only preventing design flaws. I knew better. She had stopped asking whether I should lead. She was now asking what kind of leader I would become. That was progress. Paige helped organize housing supplies. Daniel ran manufacturing. Iris ran communications and threat analysis. I controlled the warehouse and every strategic reserve. 5 people stood at the center of the crown. Only one of us knew every hidden aisle. On the final night of construction, Iris made her move. At 11:40, every internal camera went dark. At 11:42, emergency doors sealed Daniel inside the workshop and Paige inside the housing wing. At 11:45, Iris entered the central aisle carrying a flare and a small metal case. She had discovered that heat damage copied. If she started a fire before midnight, burning shelves might duplicate into more burning shelves. The exponential miracle could become exponential destruction. She did not intend to burn the warehouse. She intended to prove she could. I waited beside the silver chair as red flare light reflected from the steel walls. Iris said no single person should control something this powerful. I agreed. That surprised her. I told her no single person should be able to control it. Then I pressed a button. The walls around us folded away. We were not in the central aisle. We were inside a duplicated decoy chamber mounted on a moving platform. During her weeks of investigation, Iris had mapped the visible warehouse, tracked midnight activity, and identified what she believed was the central control route. I had built a false center around her expectations. The real midnight inventory sat 300 aisles deeper. The fire system in the decoy chamber activated. The flare vanished beneath a block of clear suppression gel. Iris looked at the silver chair, the glass case, the crown symbols, and the cameras. All copies, she asked when I had known. I told her she began planning the moment she stopped criticizing the moving city. Her silence had been too cooperative. Iris laughed, not because she had won, because I had. Then she opened the metal case. Inside was a single chess piece carved from black stone. She said she had left the matching piece somewhere in the warehouse days earlier. If the piece duplicated at midnight, she would know whether the true duplication zone included the location. If it did not, she would narrow the search. A second test inside the first test. I admired her again. At midnight, the warehouse flashed. The chess piece in her case remained alone. I had found the matching piece that morning and moved it outside. Iris closed the case. The game ended without either of us raising our voices. She agreed to stay. Under one condition, every critical system in the moving fortress would have a manual shutdown controlled by someone other than me. I agreed. Then I secretly built backups to every shutdown. Trust is a prediction. So is betrayal. At dawn, the moving city rolled out. The outer warehouse doors expanded until they were wider than a stadium. One by one, colossal modules emerged. Black carriers moved beneath silver towers. Gardens glowed behind glass. Wind turbines unfolded. Drone clouds formed protective rings overhead. Bridges connected sections as they traveled. People stood along every roof and street. The crown was no longer a building. It was a creature. At its center rolled my command tower, topped by the silver chair behind reinforced glass because Daniel insisted the chair had become a strategic asset. We moved through the western gate and stopped on high ground beyond the flood zone. The modules locked together, walls rose, streets unfolded, lights turned on in perfect sequence. A new city stood where empty fields had been that morning. By sunset, more than 40,000 people lived there. The old city remained powered by independent stations and reserve stock. I had not abandoned it. I had made it impossible for one strike to destroy everything. That night, the dust clouds finally began to break. For the first time in weeks, a line of orange sunlight appeared on the horizon. People cheered as if I had duplicated the sun. I let them believe what they wanted. Paige found me alone in the command tower. She said I had become everything she thought Grant was: rich, powerful, untouchable. I told her she still did not understand. Grant wanted to own what other people had. I wanted to decide what the world could have. She looked frightened. That meant she understood after all. Below us, Daniel tested a formation of cargo aircraft built from copied parts. Iris mapped distant radio signals. Grant sat in his clear room aboard a prison module, watching the city move without him. I should have felt satisfied. I had started with one packet of crackers and a leaking warehouse. Now I controlled the largest supply reserve on the continent, a mobile fortress, a drone fleet, clean power, medicine, food, machines, and the loyalty of a population that had once laughed at my poverty. Every challenge had made me larger. Every enemy had advertised my victory. Every limit had forced me to become more dangerous. Then Iris called me to the radio room. A signal had appeared from the eastern coast. It was weak but deliberate, a repeating pattern hidden beneath emergency static, not a plea for help, not a military code, a sequence of inventory numbers. 1 bottle, 2 bottles, 4, 8, 16. The message continued until the numbers became impossible to say. Daniel thought someone had heard rumors about the warehouse and was mocking us. Iris did not, neither did I. At the end of the sequence, a calm voice spoke 7 words. Adrian, you are duplicating the wrong things. The signal ended. Everyone in the room looked at me. For the first time, somebody beyond my city had addressed me as an equal before meeting me. I looked east, toward a horizon filled with broken towers, dark roads, and possibilities. Then I smiled. Paige had once left me because she believed poverty made me powerless. Grant had attacked because he believed abundance made me soft. Iris had challenged me because she believed intelligence should have limits. They had all taught me something. Power is never the pile of supplies behind your door. Power is deciding what happens when the door opens. I ordered the Eastern Expedition modules loaded. Water, medicine, fuel, drones, bridge sections, aircraft, spiders, heating towers, and 1 glass case containing a copied packet of crackers. Daniel asked how many vehicles I wanted. I watched the warehouse interior stretch deeper as midnight approached. I told him to prepare enough for everyone on the coast to see us coming. Behind me, aisle after aisle ignited with light. Ahead of me, the unknown voice waited. And somewhere between us was a ruined world about to learn that I had only been thinking locally.